I know you've spoken several times. I've heard you relate how particularly some passages of Scripture seem to give you strength and sustain you and give you a sense of hope in a hopeless situation.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the interesting things because, again, I mentioned the difference between religion and faith. The VC, the communists, attacked religion because they understood ritual and dogma. And if you look at it, their system is filled with ritual and with dogma, except they use it to benefit the party and the system. So they attacked it in that term. They never get above a totally, if you will, political view of religion, all right? I began to realize at that point that the ritual that I had learned, the hymns, the liturgy, everything simply went to point me in a direction. Now, I drew strength from being able to do those things as a familiar ritual in the prison camp, something the communists couldn't deny me. They would put me in isolation, whatever they wanted to do. As long as I could pray, I wasn't alone. That was the first thing. That led me to the next step, which said to me, and as I developed a basis of dependence, that faith was a belief by an individual in a supreme being, however he might define it in his own religious belief. That belief in a supreme being and the ability to communicate with that God is what faith was, because praying was that communication. Now, you know, it's hard for people to think of sometimes, and some people sometimes get edgy or uncomfortable. I'm just relating, you know, in my experience, the one thing that was essential, that was the foundation for everything else that went on, because that gave me my alternative. Was that if, and I think Rocky Versace, who was captured with me and was executed by the VC, Rocky was a staunch Catholic, but I think he said it extremely well, and he said this to a VC cadre. In fact, he shouted it at him. I could hear it all the way across the camp. I was out in my cage in the back of the camp, and Rocky was in indoctrination. And he told the cadre, he says, look, as long as I'm true to my God and true to myself, then whatever's waiting for me is better than anything you could offer me. And that's where, you know, you reach the juncture. And you say, well, if I am true to my beliefs, both in this world and in the next, then I've got a chance to walk both roads. And either way, it's going to be good. And what Rocky was saying also is that if I violate my beliefs, if I betray my loyalties and my faiths, and I have to live with that afterwards, then I've left a very vital part of myself here, and I can never get it back. And that was the choice. So faith became a simple and very personal communication between you and your God. And for some, you know, it was nothing more than a crutch to get you from day to day, but it worked. Now, the other thing was that you didn't make deals with God, because you learned in a prison camp, God says no. You know, we're accustomed to saying, dear God, help me do something. Well, in a prison camp, because you didn't know what you were really supposed to do or how to do it, you said, dear God, show me what you want me to do, and please give me the strength to do it. Now, that went right in line with what the Code of Conduct said in terms of providing the difference between right and wrong. And so there was no conflict between the two. And that was what we found, what I found was very beneficial and was a key to survival. So in that, you know, I'd go into isolation and I'd pray, and then all of a sudden 3 things that I had learned, and one that I really hadn't remembered learning, but the story came back to me, were essential and were really what I depended on. One was the 23rd Psalm, one was the 91st Psalm, and the other was the book of Job. And of course, the 23rd Psalm was the Psalm of comfort. And I was in the valley of the shadow of death, and I knew that for a fact. But at the same time, I wasn't that afraid when I realized that I had that to lean on. The 91st Psalm, the Psalm of Hope. The book of Job was the one that wiped away self-pity. And that's the other thing that kills in a POW camp is self-pity. And I had both amoebic and bacillary dysentery while I was in. I had beriberi, I had jaundice, I had tropical sprue, I had a fungus infection that covered most of my body. And I thought, hey, you know, there's a close parallel between Job and myself. And I remember right at first saying, why me, God? And then the book of Job started to come back, the story of Job. And I realized that the answer is simply because. Why? Because. And then the next thought that came in was that somewhere I remembered that God only tests those that he loves. And I thought, boy, you must really love me. You really are testing me, so you really must love me. And I figured that there must be something that I was supposed to learn. And that's where the positive thoughts overwhelmed the negative ones that come if you focus on why me and poor me. That's totally negative. You focus on there's something I've got to learn out of this. There's something I'm supposed to be taught by going through this experience. And that's where you look every day for something that you're learning, something positive that's coming out of it. Little things, little victories. Okay? And they don't have to be big ones. And I mean, it doesn't mean that you're holier than thou, because you're in there, you're jerking the guard's chains every chance you get. A sense of humor is something that keeps you going all the time. It's a very natural, a very reasonable part of the overall effort to defeat the enemy. And that was the thing that it dovetailed perfectly with what I needed at the time.